Welcome, Hindol.
Thank you very much. Jai Jagannath.
That sounds very apt. Now, as a historian today, there are alternate histories which are being talked about. That if history is written by the victors is no cliche, but at least history is written by ruling dispensations. Ruling dispensations, or people who are sympathetic, or are part of the ruling ecosystem. So for a long time, Indian history had been in control of the left. So the left interpreted Indian history in terms of the socialist, Marxist, leftist point of view, which had its own villains and heroes. Now there is a change which people like you are bringing in. How successful is the change, and why do you personally want to kind of make the decision to do that?
Thank you, Ravi. I'm always very happy to come to Bhubaneswar at the risk of making Kaveri Bamzai angry. I'm sure she's there in the audience somewhere. I come to Bhubaneswar not to attend Lit Fest, but to eat the prasad at Ananta Vasudeva temple, which is what I did this afternoon. So I come, that is my primary motivation. Everything else is secondary. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much. I love your beautiful town. Let's come to the question that you asked, Ravi. Look, I was writing books and I was writing history long before, any of the current debates came into being. My first book on the history of Indian fashion was published in 2004. So my work happened long before any of this. However, let me put something to you. In every major country where history is seriously written, like in any other social science field, it is a matter of ongoing kinetic contestation. That is the only way a field advances. There is no social science field, and certainly not history, which can advance with one static version. That this is, in a sense, the scriptural version, which cannot be touched. With all due respect, in India, we had developed these canonical scriptural versions. Therefore, certain parts of our history, only Bipin Chandra. Certain parts of our history, only Romila Thapar. And no disrespect. They did what they did in their own time, space, in the milieu in which they were part of, in the archives that were accessible to them, in the context which they could formulate, which is perfectly fine. But I think this ought to be an ongoing process. Let me give you one example. When I wrote my big biography on Sardar Patel, for about more than 3 decades after Rajmohan Gandhi wrote a book on Patel, very little work had happened on Patel, which to me is really quite astounding. So many years went by before any serious work happened on Ambedkar, and serious Ambedkar work is happening again today. So I think that there was a problem in India. Like in everything else, deification comes very easily to Indians. So therefore, we like to create these almost scriptural versions of history, which I feel is not the right way to proceed. I think history is an ongoing dialogue, even contestation, and that's the way it should be. Today, a whole bunch of us, whether it's me or it's Vikram Sampath or whether it's Manu Pillai, whatever, right? A whole bunch of people are writing their versions of history. Tomorrow there will be another set of people who will write their own, and they might challenge us, they might agree with us. As far as I am concerned, I have no problems with this. This, of course, gets mired in, contemporary politics, but that's unavoidable.
See, history is essentially a recounting of facts, is a putting down of facts. And the lines that connect it are the interpretation of the facts, which comes out of the consequences of the escalation or connection of these facts, right? So facts cannot be disputed. So the question is, are facts being disputed? That's number one. Number two, if you say that interpretations of history or their visions of history, doesn't it kind of take away from the completely neutral factuality of history?
There is no such thing as neutral history. There is no such thing as neutral anything. But certainly there is no such thing as neutral history. And let's talk about facts for a moment. You mentioned facts. Again, that's not any academic understanding of history doesn't have anything called, absolutely sacrosanct facts. What are absolutely sacrosanct facts? Even the assassination of, say, for instance, Mahatma Gandhi has been seen through many, many eyes. The assassination of, not just Gandhi, but in different parts of the world, different other world leaders, is even today being contested, re-looked at. New facts are emerging, new points of views, all kinds of ways of looking at things. This is an ongoing process.
No, the fact that Gandhi was killed cannot be denied. Or the fact that Nehru was killed.
But,
no, I'm sorry. The other
but
guy,
what caused that killing? Yes,
that's
that
what I'm
Gandhi
talking
was killed cannot be denied. But what caused that killing? In what context it happened? All of this is a matter of contestation. And different people have the right to present their, and of course I'm not going into, polemical arguments that people make of the kind that happens on news television, but I'm saying any serious work has to look at evidences, and evidences also, different people will look at the evidences in different ways, through different interpretations, and they will come to their conclusions, which may tomorrow be agreed upon or challenged. And the people doing so should have both the humility and the broad-mindedness to say that, look, there is no such thing as final word, right? We are still writing final word on what Churchill meant, long, long after Churchill is gone. You would know the UK, every year there are new, or almost every other year there are new tomes on Churchill that are being written from all kinds of angles, right? Again, then you might say, well, what are the facts about Churchill? Sure, we supposedly know the facts about Churchill, but people are constantly giving us new examples. I'll give you one small example before I conclude and you go on. When I was working on my Patel book, I worked with the Mountbatten archives at the University of Southampton, right? Now, as you know, the Mountbatten archives, only a part of it is available for public, and there's a court case in the UK and so on and so forth. One day, the entirety of that archive will be opened up for public. One day, maybe not today, maybe 10 years later, 20 years later, I don't know. But the day that happens, a new set of historians will tell us new things, not just about British history, but also about Indian history, right? And therefore, everybody who's worked on these things today might find themselves challenged at that juncture, and ought to have, or should have, or try to have the humility and the open-mindedness to say that this might happen.
Yeah, biography is about a person, right? Simply put, it's about a person.
Yeah.
And the person is relevant in the particular context. Yeah. So there is a larger context and the context of minutiae. So the larger context of Churchill was many. There's no larger context of Churchill. World War II was a context. Indian imperialism and his treatment of the famine was a concept. His racism was a concept. There were so many contexts to Churchill.
Yeah.
So those contexts are not minutiae. There are minutiae within those contexts.
Yeah.
Correct. So when you're doing a biography of a person as complicated as Churchill, there will be it'll be a massive canvas with so many contradictions. So the challenge before a historian comes into understanding, or into kind of, I would say, harmonizing, into putting into shape, bring into one shape all these contradictions. Am I right?
Or looking at, there are certain histories that look at certain aspects, right? You could write about, for instance, only one portion of the Churchillian history, right? You could look at only Churchill at war, and that itself could produce probably many volumes, right? You could look at Churchill through the angle of the British aristocratic classes and their rise and fall, and that itself could probably create a few tomes. The same with Gandhi, right? As you know, Gandhi's own context has been looked at over the years. In Africa now, some scholars are, trying to look at Gandhi through lenses that might make some Indians uncomfortable. But, that's their prerogative. We cannot stop them from using those lenses to look at Gandhi. And they're excavating Gandhian archival material, looking at it from a very African point of view, especially Gandhi's period in Africa and later, but especially in his Africa days. And they're using critical theory in that study in a manner that makes many Indians uncomfortable. But that's the ride of history, so to speak.
Yeah, but there is a karma aspect to it, because Africans, the Dalits were seen as the blacks of India, and so there was a racism towards Dalits, if I can use that thing. And if you look at the spiritual journey of the man, from being a racist in South Africa to being a protector, an anti-racist in India, is it because they existed in an Indian context, or was it because Gandhi had a stake in Indian power or Indian independence? What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's very interesting, right? You're saying today that according to you, there is a journey, and many would agree with you, that from a particular context of looking at the world in a particular way in his African days, Gandhi swung. And this is, in a sense, the Ram Guha sort of line of thinking, right? He sort of shifted 180 degrees and looked at it in a particular way. But as you know, many people, especially from a different social milieu, so to speak, and caste scholars, would not agree with this. They would say, if that is true, then the Ambedkarite argument doesn't hold. If he really went through that. And they would argue that he only went through that at one level, so to speak. But at a deeper level, and which is why the Ambedkarite argument holds in their point of view, actually the shift wasn't as dramatic as 180 degrees. There were certainly nuances, but the shift wasn't as dramatic as 100 degrees. So these are all, and I actually think that we will never come to a final answer to any of them.
To anything. That's to anything, but there was also a strong political divide over control of the Congress and control of the leadership of the independence movement.
Sure.
Ambedkar had stakes in it, Nehru had stakes in it, Jinnah, Gandhi, all of them had stakes in it.
Sure.
So, it is interesting as a historian, you have picked up a lot of the Hindu icons for your biographies. And one thing I was reading, Sampath's thing on book on Savarkar. And it dispels the notion that Savarkar was a coward. Because if you use...
Savarkar was a what?
Was a coward. It completely dispels it.
Mercy petition.
Mercy petition is not the major part. That's what the Congress has been harping about. But if you look at it, a man who has spent so many years in British jail, so British wouldn't have kept him if he was informer or he was pro-British. Obviously, the guy suffered the same deprivations every other prisoner suffered. So maybe he wrote that letter because, maybe he was human, maybe he wanted to save his comrades. We don't know. But the fact of the matter is that how Vikram has stripped away the lies or the perception about Savarkar is very interesting. And similarly, what are the other corrections in the leftist interpretation of pro-Hindu or let's say people with a strong Hindu faith had political faith? Do you have any subjects in mind which you would
I think there are a lot of things that can be said about this. I think the Congress used to be at one point at its inception, and even perhaps in the Gandhian era, a sort of a giant umbrella organization. Though, of course, I say this, even while I say this, I should caveat by saying certainly Subhash Chandra Bose and his brother never thought so. And they obviously had their own objections with Gandhi and so on and so forth. But having said that, there were many multitudinous points of views within the Congress. And I think, at Oxford, I wrote an essay, which later on, I also published in my new book on the history of the political Hindu movement, which came out this year in America and then in India and so on and so forth, wherein there were certain early conceptions of the nation that were common and commonly shared by everybody. For instance, and this is not usually understood, if you read early Nehru and early Savarkar, and, early Patel never wrote a book or Patel never wrote a treatise, but if you read his letters and so on and so forth, and you read Aurobindo and, many others, there was a commonality of understanding of what India is and what its manifest place in the world ought to be. Now, there might be disputes between people, but that conception is really shared. And there is, and I showed in that paper, that in fact, early Savarkar and early Nehru are remarkably similar in the way they conceptualize this civilizational being they call India or Bharat, right?
Examples?
All kinds of things. I mean, I'll give you one example. There is a certain spiritual tonality that they constantly use. That the river is sacred and the hill is sacred and, pilgrims, walk this path and the nation got built. This is what Diana Eck picked up when she wrote her book. And she spoke about, how Indians conceptualize their nation through the footsteps of pilgrims. But that's not a Diana Eck idea. That's a Radha Kumud Mukherjee idea and, a Savarkarite idea, Nehruvian idea. Actually, discovery of India is remarkably, spiritual in its tonality in many parts. Nehru is conceptualizing this quote-unquote sacred land of his, right? And which has a manifest destiny in the world. It must rise in the world because it has a certain destiny to fulfill. Now, he might later disagree with Savarkar and so on and so forth and many other things. But that conception is remarkably, and you find the same thing in Vivekananda, you find the same thing in Jadunath Sarkar, you find the same thing in R.C. Mazumdar, you find the same thing in Aurobindo, one can go on and on, right? That uniformity of understanding actually, in a sense, was destroyed at one point by a particular kind of left in this country. But that uniformity, if you look at the source material, absolutely exists. And that, I think, needs more work. I mean, I definitely think there's a lot more work needed on all kinds of people. Like, I would think Madan Mohan Malviya is somebody we need to understand much better. Thank you so much. I think even Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, we are far from a point where we have done enough work on Bose. I think a lot more work needs to be done on Bose. Sanjeev Sanyal wrote a very good book on the age of revolution in India. But I think especially in Bengal, that Agni Yug, it's called the Agni Yug or the age of fire, that period needs a lot more work that can be done. And there are all kinds of people. I was saying in an interview the other day, there are people like Ullaskar Datta and all kinds of other people, and remarkable stories about their sacrifice, their love stories, their deep-seated love stories, which I think we need to excavate.
Yeah, see, all politics, liberation struggles are they're driven by politics too. So let's look at the personal ambition of Bose. And let's look at an overall humanitarian judgment, to indulge me. Bose wanted independence from the British, like Gandhi or Nehru or Savarkar, any of them did.
Yeah.
But Bose, Savarkar chose internal, he went into, looking at the ancient Indian just all, the whole spiritual Hindu heritage of this nation and this, Nehru and Gandhi was I think he was the first proponent of Hindutva in my opinion, the first Rambak. I don't know why he didn't become a mascot. But Bose wanted to rule India. That's why he went all the way. And he made an unholy alliance with some of the most evil people in the world. Hitler, who massacred so many Jews, who kind of started wars, Mussolini, fascists. So Bose, and then Bose comes to India, he gets defeated, then he goes to the Andamans, if I'm not mistaken, and where the Japanese massacre locals and Bose says nothing. So the whole hagiography of Bose as this great guy, somehow doesn't seem to wash.
So I have an entirely different opinion about this story from the narrative you provided. I think when Subhash Chandra Bose went to went to Europe, well, fled British captivity and crossed over land and went to Europe and met the fascists. That time, it was a time when we were far away from the fascists that we later came to understand with the coming of the gas chambers and so on and so forth and the mass killing of the Jews. In fact, in those days, a lot of people, including Gandhi wrote a letter full of praise of the sort of determination that he saw and of our national love as he saw it of Mussolini, and in those years, a lot of people looked at those movements, especially the anti-colonial people looked at those movements in a particular light. Of course, with time, we understood that they had gone to a different depth and so on and so forth.
The Italians and the Germans had colonies too in Africa and...
Yes, but you see, their colonies compared to what India had suffered was a very different ball game, at least to people like Bose who had seen that suffering, right? And their idea was at a level also to, who would they turn to for help to fight the imperial power, which was the behemoth called Great Britain. They had to fight the enemy, they have to befriend the enemy's enemy. However, having said that, I think that, this idea that Bose, some people say from the extreme left that, this means that he was fine with the gas chambers. That's not true. And I think there's a lot of material that has come out which talks about this. That's absolutely not true. I think they had a particular perspective and context. That context turned out to be wrong, especially in what we subsequently saw with the Nazis. That's absolutely true. But I'm always surprised at this, and the people, some of the people who make this argument are the most ardent supporters of communism. Communism killed far, far more people under Stalin and Mao than the fascists ever did. So this is not to say one evil is better than the other, not at all.
And interestingly, Bose's first protocol was Moscow.
Yeah, and of course, so I think we should look at all of these things in the context of that time, what was known to those people. And when we assume today, also, Ravi, we assume today that a lot of the things that seem obvious to us would be known by these people. But it was a different era of communication. Today we think that, they would have known about this also, this also, this also. That's not true. We forget that this was an entirely different era of communication. This was these were men, both certainly, essentially a man who was fleeing, across the most desolate, terrain and,
Very adventurous journey too.
It's a crazy journey, right?
It's heroic, absolutely heroic, yeah.
Afghanistan and dressed like an Afghan and all kinds of things, right?
Stuff.
So it's an incredible story. So I think we also should look at these people, including Gandhi, I must say. And I'm not somebody who is a huge critic of Gandhi, and I know some people are, but I think Gandhi also we should look at with some degree of empathy and context. What happens in India is that, and I must say this, either we write hagiographies or we are so irrationally critical
True.
that we are trying our best to essentially character assassinate that person.
And make a noise, be known.
And make a noise, right? We are not able to often in these debates, especially after social media, get a really holistic, nuanced picture. And I think the kind of work that many of us do, is an attempt towards that.
If you look at, again, when I was saying, talking about the left domination of Indian academia, especially the historical world of academia,
Yeah.
the way the freedom struggle has been portrayed and taught even more dangerously, but the centrality is the Congress party and the sub-centrality was Gandhi and Nehru, right? As a result, the rest were all appendages. Okay, Patel got some importance because he was a man who created modern India. But the rest were all, they were not really central to the issue. They were all like satellites, right? While there is a huge alternate history of India which did not base itself on non-violence. There were patriots like Bhagat Singh, there were patriots like Chandrasekhar Azad, there were kings like Paisha Raja, there were kings that Raju, the Telugu, Telangana. There were so many of them. but they are not part of the Indian freedom movement. So do I expect, I mean, I'm asking you the historian, I'm asking you the historian who could probably be an astrologer, do you see an alternate sort of a historian emerging who will address these people and bring them into the mainstream as valid heroes as, any congressman?
I totally agree with you. I think time has come when we should write we have always written a non-violent history of India's freedom struggle. I think the time has come when we wrote a definitive violent history of India's freedom struggle. I think it's very important. I think there are many, many heroes we have left out in this process. I mean, I'll give you one example who's a sort of strange combination of violent and non-violent, right? I mean, look at Aurobindo. Aurobindo, people forget, was as a child sent away to England so that all the Indianness is stripped out of him. Aurobindo almost was a test case of converting an Indian into a perfect European, a perfect Englishman. He was taught European languages, he was taught everything that a classic English gentleman should know. Aurobindo excels in everything, but at the ICS examination excels in everything, but finally defies his father, does not sit for the final horse riding test, comes back to India. Right? Comes back to India, becomes works with the Maharaja and then becomes a revolutionary. Aurobindo was almost going to be hung. Aurobindo comes out, gives the Uttarpada speech. Aurobindo then says that in prison, he had, in a sense, visions of Swami Vivekananda. And his mission takes him far away to Pondicherry, and there, of course, the rest is history. He becomes Rishi Aurobindo. I'm saying this is a unique person who, in his very bodily self, combines the extreme violence and indeed the non-violent impulses of the search for India's freedom. And this is a huge history. I think we really need to do, and Sanjeev has written a very nice book about it, but I think his book is a beginning. Much more work needs to be done on this. There's another example, it's a city that, of course, you also know well. Look, the British left India because of the naval revolt that happened off the shore of Bombay. This idea that the British, Gandhiji marched, made salt, and the British said, all right, here is salt, well done, Mahatma Ji, goodbye, here is the country. That's rubbish. The British, who was the leading naval power of that time, already fatally weakened by the Second World War, realized that if we cannot even keep our ships, our armada off the coast of Bombay, then we cannot keep this country. So they, in fact, and you would of course know, they preponed, as we like to say in India, preponed their exit and ran away. Whereas we created this myth that, we marched in pristine white khaddar, and we made salt, and we sang some bhajans, and the British were so moved. They were such good human beings, such good people, that they said, no, we must let this country go, and walked away. What rubbish. What rubbish. These are lies that have been told to us. I'm not discounting, please don't misunderstand me. Not at all. I'm not discounting the power of Gandhiji's message or what the Congress party of that time did. But I'm saying we have to be realistic about the real politique behind it, right?
See, Gandhi tapped into the ancient Hindu concept of the sage, the ascetic, the lonely man, expounding Hindu spirituality for freedom, etc., etc. So you're really tapping into an old Hindu thing. Anyway, that apart, it's still one thing which hasn't changed from 1947 to today is that the history of India and the interpretations of power, or the exercise of power, influence rather, over minds, is always North India. All the great guys who are supposed to have, been the major heroes in the vanguard of the independence were from the North. So, if you look at the sheer number of people from the North vis-a-vis the number of people, say, from Odisha or from, except Bengal, of course, from Odisha or, you know, the South. The South has been completely ignored comparatively. Like, I mean, there have been great heroes like Paisa Raja who never written about. Nobody even knows about it. If I ask anybody in Odisha or Delhi who's Paisa Raja, they wouldn't know. So the same thing is happening in today's kind of concept. It is being, you know, determined by the Hindi speaking, the North Indian, you know, northern provinces you know, thing. Why isn't any historian coming up to correct it?
So look, I mean, I fundamentally agree with you that there is a problem, right? And let me explain how I see the problem. A lot of my work in the last few years at least has been in international relations, right? Which is what I also teach and so on and so forth. Now, if you look at IR, Ravi, in the West, even today, even as you and I speak here, they are still talking about the contestation between America and China using the Peloponnesian Wars. They are still referring everything back to the Greeks. In IR, we talk about the Thucydides trap. Right? Thucydides trap explains why a relatively strong, stable, great power, what happens when an emerging power challenges it, right? What does the Thucydides trap have to do with us? If you ask me, I am far more interested in Martanda Varma beating the Dutch East India Company in the Battle of Kolachal, which is the first ever Asiatic principality to beat a great European naval power. But Indians are not taught that history. Indian students of IR also are taught about the Thucydides trap, which is absolutely ridiculous. You know, it is often asked in Indian IR, why doesn't India have a grand strategy? How will it have a grand strategy? No. It has no history of its own to build a grand strategy on.
So if you look at it, it almost suggests you that there are many Indias. I mean, it's not one India. So did Patel fail? I'm serious. I mean, did Patel fail in creating he created a geographically coherent India, but did he fail in kind of creating a India of the mind, an India of one spirit, an India of one conscience?
So I'm an optimist in this. I actually think a lot of these things are changing. You know, today, I'll give you one small example. We finally are beginning to see, in some ways, a pan-Indian commercial movie. And that has been triggered by the South. It's been triggered by people like, you know, Prabhas and Bahubali and, you know, RRR and all of that, right? And we are seeing this intermingling of quote-unquote northern Bollywood stars, though Bombay is not really north. But still, let's just say, whatever, right, the Hindi-speaking stars and southern Indian stars, so to speak, right? To create movies that the entire of India is enjoying. You know, these are pan-India products. And I am very optimistic that we are beginning to build cultural products that can be enjoyed across the board. You know, it's incredible. You know, even though Prabhas's film on the Ramayana, of course, did not do well at all, and for good reason. But do you know, there's this wonderful video, I will share it with you separately. There's this wonderful video I saw of the lead singers, right, of that song they made, Jai Shri Ram, Jai Shri Ram. They are singing that entire song in Kannada, in Tamil, in Malayalam, you know, in all the southern Indian languages, verse by verse, and only the chorus is Jai Shri Ram. And you can see, and I think this was an event somewhere in northern India, and you can see hundreds and thousands of people cheering. I really feel, I mean, I was just tweeting the other day that today children in India should be taught as their third language, as I was taught Hindi back in the day in Kolkata.
So we're all.
They should be taught Kannada, they should be taught Tamil, they should be taught Gujarati, because that's where the jobs are. Tomorrow you might be working in Chennai or Bangalore.
I'd love to. My office is in Chennai. My head office is in Chennai.
There you are. So I think this is changing. I also think we should build a narrative for that change. You know, therefore I always wear the veshti in summer to showcase, and I buy them only from Mylapore. So, you know, and now that I'm in Orissa, this is Boyanika, lest you think this is from Delhi. So, and this is Puri, by the way. So I like to embrace my India.
Interesting, because if you look at it, Ram was born in the north.
Correct.
He started his vanvas in the thing, but his greatest, moment of victory was in South India.
And this is such an important point you have hit upon, Ravi. You think about it. All our great sages did a parikrama, right? Adi Shankaracharya went north to south, left to right, and so on and so forth, right? East to west. Look at Vivekananda. What does he do? He says, I have to discover the country, goes up and down. Okay, if you don't like spiritual figures, what about Gandhi? What about Nehru? They all did the same thing. So therefore, I think this is a long Indian tradition. We should not forget it. And there is a lot of value in constantly reminding ourselves of this tradition. Whether you like spirituality or not, this is equally a secular tradition. So we should really embrace this tradition.
Yeah, so I think she's my policeman of the debate is here. My last question. There is a lot of, in the current situation, it's getting less, mythology and history being almost the same in the beginning of this decade and slowly kind of becoming more sensible. But how much of mythology is history? Because a lot of history is mythology.
See, the word itihasa, as Vivek Debroy often reminds us, means that which happened, or so it happened, right? I think while we should not overstretch this idea and try to exactly carbon date the Ramayana and Mahabharata, which I think is a bit silly, I also do think at the same time, we shouldn't forget that today, even as we sit here, the Ayodhya that was mentioned in the Ramayana exists. The Kurukshetra that was mentioned in the Mahabharata exists. I mean, today I went to the Ananta Vasudeva temple and I was messaging somebody outside India who was asking me, what did you do? I said, they wouldn't understand prasad, so I said, I just had lunch at an 800-year-old temple. They were flummoxed that there was an 800-year-old temple, not even in Delhi, Mumbai, and all the places they've heard about, in Bhubaneswar. And I told them that, that's just one among countless such temples that are there only in Bhubaneswar. So we should be cognizant. We should be cognizant of the fact that while we should not draw very simplistic, oversimplified connections between mythology and history, and we should not go looking for flying chariots and, nuclear weapons. Somebody said internet in the Mahabharata. I mean, that's a bit silly. But we should also understand that India does have the Rakhigari digs are showing us that our history is perhaps much older.
Yep.
So we should have a certain humility about this. Actually, Ravi, the thing is, as a journalist, you will appreciate, Indians somehow, in a sense, lack humility in every profession, whether they are journalists or historians or business people. I think we should all have a little bit of humility about the riches of our own country.
And as a journalist, I can see that, since you're a journalist, I can see
Exactly.
that we're the same, in the same boat.
So I'm just saying that, we should all have a certain humility about our own country, which can surprise us yet.
I know. So what kind of humility do you recommend?
I think the humility that we ought to have is that there are things that we don't know.
Yeah, but that's a human condition, right?
But I think we live in a country and we perhaps live in an age where people come to conclusions that they know everything about something little too quickly. I think we should have some space for the unknown, which I think would be wonderful.
Yeah, but that's a quest of mankind, not to unravel the unknown.
Yes,
but that's what history too is.
Yes, but sadly,
unraveling the unknown from the known, or what is supposedly known, that's history, right?
Yes, but I think today, especially in our polemical debates, everybody seems to know something so fervently that a lot of the things that ought to be gray gets wiped out and becomes black and white, which
that is very true. That's very true. Yeah, thank you, Diksha.
Thank you.